welcome to the show. My name is Taryn Starr. This is Benison Kingdom Network. And do I have a story for you today? Oh man, so this one is a doozy, and I actually will have two versions of this story. This is the quick version, where I'm going to cover as many things as I can related to this case. This is a Supreme Court case that has really been in the news a lot lately. We're going to be covering United States versus Skrmetti. We're going to cover what exactly is this case, where did it come from, why is it so important today, and why you should pay attention to it. If you want all of my breakdown on what in fact is actually being covered in this, what are all the different facets of this case, and really breaking down what is gender dysphoria, what even is the trans movement, where did that come from, what actually is gender affirming care, what all does it cover. If you want all of that information, watch my longer video. But this will be just the brief overall coverage. So what exactly is United States versus Skrmetti? Well, there was a law that was passed in Tennessee. This law was titled the SB 1. And according to the Williams Institute, and this is just so you know, I pulled from a very left-leaning source so that I could kind of get all sides of the story here. Quote, Tennessee's law, SB 1, prohibits medical practitioners from providing, quote-unquote, gender-affirming puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries for the purposes of enabling that minor to identify with or live as a purported identity that is different than the minor's biological sex, or treating the purported discomfort or distress from discordance between a minor's sex and their associated identity. So again, that is from the Williams Institute. It is a very far left-leaning institution. One of the things I will say, according to Ground News, this story has been covered by 161 news sources. That is a massive amount of coverage. So just for perspective, just so you know, most of that coverage has been quote-unquote center, but a lot of it, when I reviewed it, was actually left-leaning. And in their bias distribution chart, there are 47 that are very heavily left-leaning articles with only, I believe there's only 21. Yes, there's only 21 articles that are actually right-leaning at all. So you should know that when it comes to this case, more likely than not, you're going to come across information that's very far left-leaning. So however that hits you, just know that that is the biggest thing. There are three major assertions in this case. Number one, every single time I see it reported, the same thing comes up, the transgender attorney. I do not know why the gender of the attorney is so important other than the fact that it is a quote-unquote first. Number two, the second thing you'll see is the court is going to decide if Tennessee's ban violates a constitutional equal protection clause, which could impact laws targeting transgender individuals. And number three, major medical institutions support gender-affirming care, and they are quoting high suicide risk among youth with gender dysphoria. Okay, let's break down all those things really quickly. So, number one, again, I don't know why it seems so important that every single institution has referenced the gender of the attorney. I've literally never seen any other court case reference the gender of the attorney except for this one. Number two, the court is going to decide if it violates the Constitution. So there's two major facets under this. Number one, the Equal Protection Clause basically has to do with race. And it essentially says that all races, all genders are equally protected under the law. And so the argument is that Skrmetti is putting forward essentially is saying that if you do not provide a child with hormones that could literally factually damage them, that is actually going against the Constitution. Excuse me. That's, to me, is literally mind-blowing. It's so mind-boggling. I cannot understand how this could possibly fall under the Constitution. However, that is the argument that's being made. And the third thing that's being referenced is there's these medical institutions that are saying that they support gender-affirming care, and they're citing high suicide rates. So I just want to reference something really quick. There's all these quote-unquote research and studies that's been done saying, oh, look, gender-affirming care actually lowers suicide risks. And when I researched a lot of those studies, they were kind of nebulous. You didn't really know what percentage actually helped, what kind of ideology was in the background. And so I researched and found a new case that was done by the Heritage Foundation and they basically said, we want to find out if this is real, right? Does this affirming care actually help. And so what they did is they basically watched every single state that allowed kids to essentially go to doctors and transition their health, transition their body, get cross-sex hormones, get surgeries without the consent of parents. Because in those states, there's a radical increase of kids who started coming in because they didn't have to get their parents' approval anymore. Okay, so they did this study and they said this, quote, there is a 14% increase in suicide rates among young people by 2020 in the states that have a provision allowing minors to access care without parental consent relative to the states that do not. So this is basically a comparison. We're saying, okay, the states that don't, their suicide rate stayed at whatever level it was, and the states that allowed this went up by 14%. Easier access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones by minors actually exacerbated suicide rates. Okay, so that's a quote by the Heritage Foundation. And one of the other things I want to just point out is that this is something that's happening worldwide. There is essentially a worldwide wake-up call that is happening right now. In fact, Europe is one of the little-known, little-reported affirmers that has come into this case really supporting the ban, right? They're saying, we don't think this is a good idea. So there was actually a review done by the ACSH.org news, and they reported this. Trans/detrans lawsuits that are determining the standard of care. And they basically say, quote, the UK's only gender clinic, there's only one, okay, in all of the UK, is called the Tavistock. And it has been ordered to close next year over concerns for the safety of its patients. More than 1,000 families of former patients are expected to join a class action lawsuit to sue the Tavistock for recklessly prescribing puberty blockers and unquestioningly launching children down the gender affirmation path. Okay, so there are things happening all over the world right now saying, we want to protect our citizens who are already transgender. We're not trying to stop things for them. But look, when you're dealing with kids, we need to put an end to this. And so honestly, just the societal critique that I take out of all of this is, I think it's time for people to wake up. And I think people are. I think the reality of watching all these big cases start hitting the news is actually really heartening for me. It's actually an incredible thing to see people starting to stand up. But I think this is one of those classic questions where you have to ask yourself, how much is too much, right? Where do you hit the line where people who before, we didn't want to cover it, we didn't want to talk about it, who really, like in their day-to-day lives, didn't deal with transgender people, and so honestly, they just didn't think about it. Where is the line where those people finally stand up and say this isn't right? And I think this is the line. The line ends when we try to really cut off the breasts of little girls. The line ends when we try to castrate little boys. The line ends when we assign puberty blockers, which were used to chemically castrate pedophiles in prison, when we start assigning those to children. That's where the line ends. And that's when we really need to step up. So if you are looking at this story, you're going to yourself, oh my gosh, I actually need to review this more. I need to know, what all does gender dysphoria include? What does this even mean? How do I tell what this is in my child? We're going to be releasing future videos just covering some of those things. But I do have a longer version of this where I break down everything. I break down what is gender dysphoria, what are all these different care procedures, what do those procedures actually do, what do the hormones actually do. If you want to learn about any of that, go watch my longer version where I cover everything else in detail when it comes to United States versus Skrmetti. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Follow us at Benison Kingdom Network. And if you want to see more of my work, follow me at terranstar.official. Would love to see you there. Bye.